The dreaded terror outfit ISIS seems to be making a comeback, and it's not some obscurantist and fundamentalist organizations who are aiding and abetting the regeneration of the ISIS, but rather the very nations who fought for 3 years, some of the most fierce battles in the deserts of Syria and Iraq, who are now recruiting the ISIS fighters. According to reports, the Turkish army, which launched an offensive along its southern border with Syria in an operation called Operation Olive Branch, is recruiting, training and rearming former ISIS fighters to fight their battles. When Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan announced Operation Olive Branch, he'd insisted that the military offensive in the Kurdish-dominated region of Afrin was to keep its borders safe. This operation is a fight against the Kurdish YPG forces and the SDF, or the Syrian Democratic Forces, who had been close allies of the US in defeating the ISIS in eastern parts of Syria. Erdogan's objective is to quell any Kurdish nationalistic movement along its southern and eastern border with Syria and Iraq. A former ISIS fighter who has now been enlisted in the Turkish army to fight against the YPG said, and I'm quoting, "How we were steadfast in Grozny, in Chechnya, and Dagestan in North Caucasus, and we took Tora Bora, the former headquarters of Osama bin Laden, and now Afrin is calling to us." This incident has, of course, thrown up some serious questions on whether the nations which fought against the ISIS are serious about bringing those militants to justice or are willing to assimilate them into their armed forces just because it suits them. And it's not just Turkey under Erdogan which is actively aiding the continuance of the ISIS. In fact, every nation with a stake in this region has negotiated and aided the world's most ruthless Islamist terror group. And each side involved in Syria is blaming the other for its revival. Senior Foreign Affairs Editor Padma Rao has more.
Syria's ally, Russia, has just patted itself on the back in public for ridding Syria of the Islamic State. Some months ago, the United States had also claimed its victory over the ISIS. But reports have emerged that the Islamic State is well and alive and has regrouped right under the noses and with the knowledge of all parties involved in the Syrian conflict. The year 2017 ended on a high for all the countries which claim to be fighting the terror group. The mission to defeat the Islamic State in Syria carried out by the armed forces of the Russian Federation has been accomplished. This is what General Sergei Rutskoy of Russia said. "We defeated Daesh, that's the ISIS. Long live Iraq and its people." That's what the Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi of Iraq said. "I want to thank Mattis for doing such a great job. He's knocked the hell out of ISIS." That was President Donald Trump of the United States. Late last year, Syrian troops advanced against ISIS in eastern Syria near the ISIS stronghold Deir ez-Zor. Many expected a fierce and bloody battle. Oddly, the Islamic State fell rather tamely and Syrian troops occupied Deir ez-Zor. But shortly thereafter, ISIS sprung back into life again, this time 270 kilometers west of Deir ez-Zor, on the border between territories held by the Syrian government troops on the one hand and anti-government rebels on the other. And there they began a fresh offensive. Syria is backed by Russia and Iran. The United States is backed by the Western coalition and, on the ground, by Syrian Kurds. They have all waged bitter and bloody wars against the world's most ruthless Islamist terror outfit. So how on earth did this regrouping happen? There are several theories coursing through the global media. A UK-based strategist told Germany's Bild Daily that Syrian President Bashar al-Assad was to blame. He said that ISIS, Russia and Mr. Assad often worked, quote-unquote, hand in hand. It goes like this. The Russian-Syria coalition bombs anti-government rebels while the ISIS attacks those rebels. In return, the ISIS launches attacks on rebels to allow government troops to advance. Southeast Asian ISIS fighters too are said to be back with their terror group in Deir ez-Zor, but may have also joined the thousands of ISIS terrorists said to be hiding out in Turkey, according to one Malaysian publication. There may be a grain of truth to the allegations. In fall 2017, Syria had struck a surrender deal and allowed 300 ISIS terrorists and families to leave the Syria-Lebanon border for Deir ez-Zor. US-led forces had bombed the 17 buses carrying the terrorists, and the convoy finally left after splitting in two directions. But where did those two buses go? Russia has struck back. In a recent interview, the chief of Russia's general staff, General Gerasimov, blamed the United States for reviving the Islamic State in Syria to create yet another anti-Assad fighting force. According to General Gerasimov, Tanf, the US military base in Syria on the border to Iraq, is being used by the United States to train former ISIS militants as the new Syrian army, quote-unquote, to destabilize Syria. There are many grains of verity in that claim too. Just months after Damascus obliged by providing those buses for the terrorists to leave, so also did the US-led coalition. They too struck a deal with the ISIS, one they use a euphemism to describe, quote-unquote, civilian evacuation. The clouds of war had seemed to have lifted from the troubled region just months ago. But it is not only Turkey's ongoing offensive against Kurds in Syria that is threatening to destabilize Syria again. When it comes to creating a situation on the ground which will give all the big powers with geostrategic stakes in the region an excuse to stay on indefinitely, there are plenty who seem willing, even if it means sleeping with the enemy. Padma Rao, WION.